Hey everyone, in this video we are going to talk about the two main beast cameras, Sony A7 III and Sony A7S III. So we'll discuss the difference between Sony A7 III and Sony A7S III. By going through the differences between both of these two cameras, you can decide whether you should go for the Sony A7 III or Sony A7S III. So it's 2021 and these two cameras are at this moment, they are the best camera if you are looking for a camera which helps you to have the photography as well as the videography. But there are certain differences between these two cameras, and by going through each differences you can decide which one is best for you. So you can just consider before buying any of these cameras. So we'll discuss all the important factors which you may not find elsewhere, but you will find in this video. So stay with me, watch this video, and after that, I'm sure if you have any confusion regarding which camera you should pick, that confusion would be cleared, right? So this is a complete guide of deciding between Sony A7 III and Sony A7S III. And before we go any further, please hit the like button. If you have any question or if you want to say something, leave that in the comment section below. And if you have still not subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing for more amazing tips, tricks and tutorials. So without further ado, let's get started. Sony A7 III has the 24 megapixel camera, whereas the Sony A7S III has the 12 megapixel camera. So a 24 megapixel camera is good for photography as well as for the videography or for the videos. But the 12 megapixel camera is not that great for the photography, alright? So the reason behind the Sony has kept the 12 megapixel camera in its latest Sony A7S III is for faster processing. Besides that, 12 megapixel also helps you to have the less noise while working in the low light. Whereas if you have the more megapixels, then the low light performance will not be that great. So that's the main thing with the Sony A7 III and Sony A7S III. So if you are more like a low light shooter, consider these options before buying any of these. If you are a vlogger or if you want to get into the vlogging or if you plan to start vlogging soon on your channel, then this next feature is very important to consider. The Sony A7 III does not have a flip screen. It has only the tilting screen. So you can tilt it up or down, but you cannot tilt it left or right. And whereas the Sony A7S III has the flip screen, so you can just flip it in any direction. So so that's very important and that's very helpful for the vlogging. So if you are vlogging or if you are a YouTuber and you are shooting YouTube videos so that you can see yourself and you can see whether framing is right or whether you are in focus or not with the help of a flip screen, which is only available in the Sony A7S III. And if you buy the Sony A7 III, you have to buy an external monitor or external field monitor, which costs around 10,000 in Indian rupees or around $100 or $20 something in the US dollar. So that's the extra expenses you have to consider, and that is a little extra stuff you have to put on your camera, and that doesn't look that great if you are vlogging, right? So consider this thing as well because that's very important. So next thing which is very important and the next factor which you need to consider for Sony A7 III or Sony A7S III is that the Sony A7 III does not have a auto eye focus detection for the video mode. So if you are using the video mode, then you won't have the auto eye detection mode, and though you have the face detection mode and that also works great, whereas the Sony A7S III has the auto eye detection for the video mode as well. So no matter what you shoot, you can have the auto eye focus. So there are less chances that your videos will be out of focus. Alright, though both of these work just fine. Face detection is also working very amazingly in the Sony A7 III and as well as in Sony A7S III. So you have to consider that Sony A7S III has the auto eye detection for the video mode as well. Sony A7 III is capable of shooting in 8-bit video format, whereas the Sony A7 III is capable of shooting in 10-bit video format, which is amazing and helpful for the color grading. So which gives you more dynamic range and more data to process while color grading in post-production. So that's very important. So with the help of more data, though your file size would be very large, but you have lots of data to process and get the desired look you want. So consider that as well. Another thing which you need to consider is the Sony A7 III's viewfinder is not that great, whereas they have drastically improved the viewfinder or electronic viewfinder in the Sony A7S III. Now it's just like a glass and it seems like you are seeing through a glass. So it's more amazing, more high quality, more high definition. So you just consider that before picking any of these cameras. Sony A7 III shoots 4K in 30 frames per second only. But if you shoot in full HD, you can shoot up to 120 frames per second. Whereas the Sony A7S III allows you to shoot 4K in 120 frames per second, 120 FPS, which is amazing. As you know that the future is coming and the future has only the 4K. Future is for the 4K content, and if you are into lots of slow motion and you love to create those cinematic slow motion, then you must get the 120 frame per second for 4K if you plan to shoot that in the near future. Otherwise, what you can do, you can right now you can shoot 4K in 30 frames per second, and later on when you have some budget, then you can go for the Sony A7S III. That's what I have decided to do. Now let's consider the main factor, and that is the price point. There is a huge price difference between Sony A7 III and Sony A7S III. The Sony A7 III costs around 1.5 lakh in Indian rupees, and in US dollar it's around $2,000 something. And Sony A7S III costs around 3 lakh, which is double the amount of Sony A7 III. And in US dollar it's around $3,500 something. So that is also the double the price of Sony A7 III. So you have to consider with the double price what you are getting. Main thing, number one is the flip screen, second is auto eye detection for the video mode, third thing is the 16-bit RAW format, so you can shoot with that as well, and the last thing which is very important, and that is the 4K 120 frame. So with the double the price you are getting all of these, whereas in the Sony A7 III you don't have the 120 frame options. You can shoot only 30 frames per second, 30 FPS in Sony A7 III in 4K mode. Whereas if you are doing the slow motions for the full HD videos, you can just have the Sony A7 III, because that way you can shoot in 120 frames per second. But you want to shoot slow-mo for the 4K, then you must get the Sony A7 III. So these are the points which you need to consider to decide which camera you should go with. And the clear winner in this scenario is Sony A7S III if you don't have the budget issue. But if you have the budget issue, then go for the Sony A7 III. And if you want your camera to be future proof, then you must also wait till the price of Sony A7S III just lowers down a bit, and or you can somehow wait and manage to get that much of money to buy the Sony A7S III, because that would be future proof. Alright, and Sony A7 III, though that is also a great camera and you can work with that for 5 years. Till for 5 years it's not going to be outdated, but you don't have the slow-mo in 4K. So that things which you need to be considered. And you can see at this moment we are at a point where the 4K time has arrived. All right, so most of the contents are in 4K, or now the 8K has also started coming in, but at this moment 4K is almost started. So you have to have the 4K slow motion. All right, but if you don't shoot 4K at this time, then you can just go for the Sony A7 III. So these are the things which you need to consider. What are your thoughts about these two cameras, and which one you plan to buy or which one you should pick? Do let me know in the comment section below.